Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. My name is Tony Ballard, and I'm the Manager of Education and Meetings with the Society for Ecological Restoration. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, From Guidelines to Action, Implementing Best Practices in Mangrove Restoration, with our speakers, Elena Rodham, Valerie Hager, Laura Vaverka, and Mark Beeston. As always, I'd like to give you a bit of information on SER before we begin, as some of you may be new to our work and what we do. SER is an international association that organizes the science, policy, and practice of ecological restoration to sustain biodiversity, improve resilience in a changing climate, and reestablish an ecologically healthy relationship between nature and culture. One way we accomplish that mission is through our webinar series, through which we typically offer 2 to 3 webinars per month from a wide variety of speakers who are involved in the field of ecological restoration. Browse upcoming webinars, view existing webinar recordings, and find information on our many resources. We invite you to look at our website, www.ser.org. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available for future viewing in our webinar library. This session is going to run for about an hour in total. Everyone is muted, but you can type your questions into the Q&A box on the bottom bar, and speakers will address specific questions from you after the presentation. Please don't hesitate to ask questions through the Q&A at any point during the session. And to assist our speakers, we ask that you keep questions concise and related to today's presentation only. Before we begin, here's a little background on today's webinar. The Best Practice Guidelines for Mangrove Restoration is a joint product developed by the Global Mangrove Alliance and the Blue Carbon Initiative, and led by the University of Queensland, Conservation International, Wetlands International, Blue Marine Foundation, and the International Blue Carbon Institute, along with dozens of mangrove scientists and other groups across the world. It brings together the latest accumulated local and scientific knowledge about mangrove restoration best practices into one comprehensive resource. The aim is to align mangrove practitioners, NGOs, governments, scientists, industry, local communities, and funders around accepted best practices for science-based and inclusive mangrove restoration. Now, to begin the webinar, it's my pleasure to welcome today's first presenter, Elena Rodham.
Thank you, Tony. Just check that you can see my screen properly.
That looks perfect.
Perfect. Okay. Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from today. I'm Elena Rodham, Senior Technical Officer, Mangrove Restoration for Wetlands International, and we'll be opening today's webinar with a 10-minute presentation on best practice guidelines for mangrove restoration. So when you think about guidelines, some of these probably spring to mind. And we've worked with a lot of these scientists and experts to write the guidelines. Now, the guidelines are a product of a growing global restoration community. So that's the GMA, the Global Mangrove Alliance, who joined forces with the Blue Carbon Initiative, together with dozens of scientists and user groups and focuses, bringing together the latest accumulated local and scientific knowledge about mangrove restoration best practices into one comprehensive resource and a successful collaboration among scientists and experts. Now, despite this wealth of guidelines, scientific data tells us that some regions still see failure rate of 80% of mangrove restoration. And this is the drive behind the guidelines. It's to tackle this failure rate and drive the success rate of mangrove restoration. So why do some mangrove restoration efforts fail? Well, scientific data tells us that this is sometimes down to poor project planning. So many initiatives remaining ill-informed, or restoration efforts failing to adhere to ecological mangrove restoration principles, which we'll talk about today, or even the lack of access to sound guidance and tools to support the planning, implementation, and evaluation of restoration projects. It can also be due to the lack of local engagement and the lack of local activities that sustainably benefit from the restored mangrove values. It can also be down to planting in unsuitable areas, or planting without addressing hydrology, nutrient and sedimentation requirements, unfortunately resulting in mangrove die-off or mangroves with limited benefits and low resilience. But there is a recipe for success, and I'm going to talk about two of the ingredients inside this recipe. The first one is CBEMR, and the second are the 6 guiding principles. So let's look at the first one. CBEMR, community-based ecological mangrove restoration. Now, the guidelines steer the reader towards CBEMR. This approach focuses on understanding the ecology and the hydrology of the site and correcting problems that caused the mangrove loss in the first place. It's a method that has seen worldwide success and demonstrates an effective and sustainable approach to mangrove restoration. Now, this method moves mangrove restoration away from the conventional wisdom of gardening, of building nurseries, of growing seedlings, planting mangroves, and moves away from this notion of restoration objectives being number of trees planted. It moves towards mangrove area restored and protected, so really towards the restoration of fundamental ecological processes by ensuring, number one, that the right biophysical conditions are being addressed. So that is hydrology, nutrient, sedimentation requirements. And if you're a project manager, that might actually mean that you are bringing together community members or your teams to build channels, build artificial breakwaters, maybe creating artificial creeks. And the second is fostering the right socioeconomic conditions, so working with local stakeholders and communities from that planning stage all the way through to monitoring and management. Therefore, stimulating this feeling of stewardship to support long-term recovery and protection. So that's the first ingredient. Let's have a look at the second one. The second one are the 6 guiding principles. Now, the guidance aims to connect practical implementation of mangrove restoration to these 6 principles. The 6 guiding principles serve as guardrails for successful mangrove restoration, and they are an essential read if you are involved in mangrove restoration. Now, I do them no justice in this webinar, and I really do encourage you to read them. They're in the guidelines, and we will also send out the link to have a look at the 6 guiding principles. But for the sake of this webinar, I'm going to present the 6 guiding principles through a successful mangrove restoration project. The project is called Building with Nature in Indonesia, and it's developed by Wetlands International. The goal was to build a stable coastline, and I'm going to go through each of these 6 guiding principles with examples of what they underwent. So, number 1, understanding where and where not to restore. So striving for diverse and sizable restoration. Number 2, they made use of science, local knowledge, multidisciplinary teams. They addressed biophysical and socioeconomical aspects. The project engaged local actors in all stages of the project, understanding the benefits and the services that mangroves bring to these communities. Number 4, given the position of mangroves between land and sea, this usually requires the involvement of several agencies, each with different mandates and targets. Therefore, different perspectives were aligned to help clarify land ownership and resolve conflict. Designing for sustainability. So risks were carefully mapped out and understood so that risk mitigation measures could be put in place. So designing solutions that address those biophysical and socioeconomic root causes of loss and degradation, and ensuring local ownership. So community involvement was key. This programme showed that farmers will give up ponds for mangrove restoration if there is intensive stakeholder engagement and improvement of production in new ponds. And point number 6, so mobilising high integrity capital. And I think Mark's going to talk a lot more about that in today's webinar. So conservation and restoration of mangroves is starting to drive large-scale finance aimed at supporting local to national scale action. However, mobilisation of capital needs to avoid false benefits and ensure equitable access to funds. So investments in mangroves need to have clear and fair terms that all impacted communities and stakeholders agree to, and for those risks to be shared. So who are the guidelines for? They're for you. They are for, number one, private and public practitioners and coastal zone managers. So the guidelines offer you a practical stepwise approach through project cycles. So from feasibility through to implementation, long-term maintenance. They help ensure that you're aware of and adopt best practice approaches and continue to improve and use adaptive management as needed. They are for international policymakers and private sector branch organisations. So the guidelines offer you as well inspiration and evidence to help drive integration of mangroves in sustainable development, climate and biodiversity policies and sectoral strategies. And the 6 guiding principles I spoke to you about before, they help set the quality benchmark and help monitor and deliver tangible impacts. Investors and development banks, the guidelines support your selection of high quality propositions. They can help to de-risk investment by reducing failure risks and ensuring compliance and enhanced cost efficiency. So the guidelines have a modular structure, and we recently published a submodule on blue carbon, and we are actually working on additional modules, so related to coastal protection, biodiversity and fisheries, and these are in the pipeline. We are building and gathering a suite of tools. We currently have the Global Mangrove Watch, which is a remote sensing and monitoring tool, the Mangrove Restoration Tracker tool, which Laura will be talking about more in depth today, and we have the Local Ecological Knowledge Guidelines. So all these tools are but a first step, a springboard of sorts in a larger long-term dissemination and learning strategy to reduce that failure rate in mangrove restoration. So with the mangrove community at the core of what we do, we will be developing, implementing and disseminating best practice through knowledge tools, support platforms, in-field training, and exchange opportunities for the mangrove restoration community. And now, before I leave, I have 3 key messages to share with you. First one is conserve what is there now. So when project planning, instead of planting monocultures, aim for restoring a mangrove ecosystem with multiple species, natural hydrological flows, and natural zonation, which has been shown to enhance restoration success and longevity. Weave these 6 guiding principles into each step of your project cycle process. And using best practices will more likely result in a sizable, diverse, functional, and self-sustaining ecosystem that benefits people and nature. And where can you find all our tools? They are on the Global Mangrove Alliance website. If you click on the top right-hand corner, it will take you to the Knowledge Hub, and there you'll have access to all our tools. And that's all from me, and I look forward to hearing any comments that you may have, and I will now leave you with Valerie.
Okay, hello everyone. How's that for screen sharing?
That looks great.
Okay, thanks, Tony. So thanks Eleanor for that excellent outline of the mangrove guidelines. I'm going to take you more now into a deep dive into chapters 2 and 3. And first of all, I just wanted to introduce myself. So I'm Valerie Hagger. I'm an ecologist, a restoration ecologist and research fellow at the University of Queensland in Brisbane, Australia. And I just wanted to acknowledge my co-authors at the University of Queensland that contributed to these guidelines, in particular Clint Cameron, Catherine Lovelock and James Zippo. And I'm really speaking on behalf of the University of Queensland author team. But really, these guidelines were the result of many mangrove scientists from around the world who came together and gave their time so generously. And we really thank you for them to be able to bring all these guidelines and put them into one place. And I just really want you, I've only got 10 minutes, so I'm going to really highlight some key lessons that we've learned from undertaking mangrove restoration. So what is restoration success? So this is really what you are trying to achieve or your desired outcomes. And I just wanted to take a moment to ask you why you undertake restoration. So if you could just take a little moment to have a think, and please pop your answer in the chat, because this will really help us in planning for future modules of the mangrove guidelines. So I'll just give you one moment there, and I'd love to see all your responses come through in a nice waterfall, and we can look at them later. And there's lots of reasons why you may want to undertake restoration, and it can be from reinstating tidal flows to just improving forest cover to recovering biodiversity, and also to deliver the many ecosystem services that mangroves can provide, from fisheries production to improving water quality to support livelihoods. So identifying restoration outcomes requires consultation and engagement with communities and stakeholders. And then from identifying these diverse motivations, you can consider these in your setting of goals and objectives. And when you bring more people on board and incorporate these shared goals, your project is more likely to be successful. And so in establishing clear goals and measurable objectives, there's, people quite often have a bit of a challenge with this in establishing SMART goals and objectives. But essentially it starts with understanding what your desired outcomes are for your restoration. So what needs to be recovered. And then your goals are related to these outcomes, and they can be short, medium, or long term. And then they are essentially statements which relate to how you're going to achieve those desired outcomes. Whereas your objectives are shorter term statements which state how your goal will be achieved. And these need to be SMART, which stands for being specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. But it's really important that you have relevant indicators to measure progress, because you can't manage what you can't measure. So ensuring that you have measurable indicators within your objectives will help these be relevant. So just to give you some example, your restoration outcomes can be both ecological and social. And say a goal might be that basal area is restored to a reference state within 25 years. And your objective might be that basal area increases to 20% of that required to achieve basal area of the reference state within 5 years. And then your indicator is basal area. And this can be calculated from plot-based measurements of tree circumference and tree density. And we have the international standards for the practice of restoration, and these can help guide you in forming your goals. And originally, we had the SIR recovery wheel for ecological restoration, and this was really driven by the fact that there are 6 key ecological attributes that you need to consider when you want to undertake successful ecological restoration. So these help you ensure that you have goals around these key attributes, and they are still relevant to mangrove restoration in terms of having species composition, structural diversity, ecosystem function, external exchanges, absence of threats, and physical conditions. And recently, the social benefits wheel was also added, recognizing the importance of ensuring that your restoration delivers social and economic benefits to the community. And these attributes are a bit more flexible, but you could form goals around things like community well-being, stakeholder engagement, benefits distribution, knowledge enrichment, restoring natural capital, and sustainable economies. However, these recovery wheels provide a good framework, but you really need to develop sub-attributes which are specific to mangroves. And there have been attempts to provide some suggestions for these attributes. And we do provide some suggestions in the mangrove guidelines if you want to have a look at them. So it really requires you thinking around these 6 ecosystem attributes, what are specific to mangroves, and designing your goals and objectives around that. So next, I really wanted to stress the importance of having reference dates in designing your goals and objectives. So usually when we measure the progress of restoration, there are kind of 3 approaches that you can use. So the first one is just that you have an improvement from a baseline. So the baseline being what was there before restoration. And then you do a measurement of your baseline or before restoration, and then you do measurements after your restoration action. And if you have any improvement from your baseline, then you could count that as being successful. The better approach to undertake a monitoring and establishing goals is to ensure that you have a reference state. So this can be derived from ideally more than one reference site. And it's tricky in mangroves because you need to make sure that you have reference sites from the equivalent mangrove strata, and ensuring that you account for that strong mangrove zonation that you have, which is related to elevation and strong environmental gradients. So then once you have reference states, you can understand the progress relative to the unmodified control site. And a third emerging approach is also to measure progress against like a modified control site, which is almost like your counterfactual, like what would have happened at a disturbed site had you not undertaken a restoration action. But at a minimum, I would suggest that you have reference dates, because this allows you to identify the success of your restoration project against what you aspire to achieve. And then also assessing a counterfactual can help you understand what is the benefit of your restoration action. And it also allows you to measure or like detect when you have disturbances and then respond accordingly in adaptive management, like extreme weather events, cyclones, or and storms. So once you have an idea of your goals and objectives, the next thing is to establish like what the restoration feasibility is, and you can undertake this as a site level or a landscape level. So some key considerations at a site level is to ensure that you have the correct land access rights, that you have the legal permissions required. It's quite complex in mangroves. There's a lot of jurisdictions at the interface between land and sea. Having community engagement and participation is really important to ensure long-term stewardship of your project. Understanding what the current land use is and the site history and what the drivers of mangrove loss were, to ensure that you address those so they're not going to degrade your mangrove restoration once you've undertaken your action. Ensuring that you'll have the correct biophysical suitability of sites to undertake restoration, and also ensuring that it's economically feasible, that you have the resources to continue that restoration action and ensure that you can monitor and maintain it. You also need to think about the wider context in terms of what are the environmental and socioeconomic issues in the landscape, and also what are the policy and governance conditions which might be constraining your project. And most importantly, you need to undertake restoration which is climate smart. So planning for things like, temperature increases and sea level rise, and ensuring that you have accommodation space to allow ecosystem transitions with sea level rise. And there's a bunch of tools available which can help you undertake this restoration feasibility, from community-based ecological mangrove restoration to the restoration opportunities and assessment methodology. And in particular, I really like an approach which is being done in Southwest Madagascar for the Tahini Honko project, which is participatory planning of a mangrove carbon project. So I urge you to look up that reference. And then once you have an idea of your feasibility, you can start to think where your restoration project might lie along the restoration continuum. So you're probably quite familiar with this, but essentially, if you don't have many barriers in place, and you can just enact natural regeneration by stopping the underlying causes of degradation, like the harvesting of mangroves, then that's what you should address and allow nature to take its course by stopping those causes of degradation. And then along that restoration continuum, you look for barriers. And if you have more process barriers, like aquaculture ponds, and you have restricted tidal flows, or you have invasive species, you address those barriers. And once those barriers are released, you can do stuff like assisted natural regeneration. And it's not unless you have like a combination of like, biological barriers and physical and chemical barriers that you need to think about doing direct intervention, which is active actions once the suitable conditions have been established. For example, replanting of mangroves if you have insufficient propagule supply. And these are some of the key biophysical challenges to successful mangrove restoration, which is ensuring that your restoration is in the correct intertidal zone, ensuring that you're not undertaking restoration or planting which is below mean sea level and would have prolonged inundation of propagules, which would die in the long term, ensuring that you have the correct hydrology, so unrestricted tidal flow or reinstating the tidal flows to ensure you have regular tidal inundation, ensuring that the hydrodynamics are correct so that you don't have too high wave and wind energy, which is going to cause erosion of your recently restored mangroves, ensuring that you have a good supply of propagules, and also ensuring that you have the correct sediment supply, like not too much sediment and not too little. And for example, this is a project example where I work in Queensland, Blue Heart, where historically the ecosystem was all a supertidal forest, but because of subsidence, because of cropping, the land has been lowered. And so we're expecting mangroves to return here, but it's going to be a novel ecosystem because it wasn't what was there historically. So you need to think about novel ecosystems in your planning. And some of the socioeconomic issues, again, I just wanted to stress that community participation and engagement are really important to integrate that local knowledge to identify socioeconomic drivers of mangrove degradation, having government and political support, ensuring you have access rights and the responsible agencies support you, and you have also recognized customary Indigenous rights. And good governance for community-based restoration is also really important, and ensuring that if there are socioeconomic issues, for example, harvesting of mangroves to support livelihoods, that you have some alternative livelihoods and alternative incomes for those communities. So just wanted to end with summarizing some of the key messages. So establishing clear goals with measurable objectives is important to integrate shared goals in your restoration, and community engagement is essential for ensuring that you have local leadership and knowledge for that long-term sustainability of your project. And mangrove restoration can typically fail in sites with prolonged inundation or where conditions are unsuitable and seedlings cannot survive. And restoration design should correct hydrology, hydrodynamics, sedimentation, and propagule issues, and aspire to natural reference sites. Thank you very much. And now we're going to have Laura.
Thank you, Valerie. That was a great presentation. Hopefully you all can hear me. I'm just going to take a moment to pull up my slides, but as I do, I'd like to introduce myself. Hi, everyone. My name is Laura. I am a program officer with World Wildlife Fund, and I support many of our seascapes integrated approach portfolio, but I also support some of our coastal ecosystems work, and I also temporarily serve as a coordinator for the Global Mangrove Alliance. So just give me 1 second here. All right, so hopefully you can all see my screen.
Yes, it looks great.
Thanks, Tony. All right, so I'm very excited this morning to share with you a brief introduction to a highly collaborative effort to help meet local practitioner needs while tracking progress of global targets in terms of mangrove restoration. The development of the Mangrove Restoration Tracker Tool, or MRTT for short, was supported with over 100 collaborators and chiefly from several Global Mangrove Alliance organizations, including Conservation International and co-led by the Nature Conservancy, University of Cambridge, and World Wildlife Fund. I would just like to drive home the understanding up front that this tool is not a platform or methodology specific to mangrove monitoring itself, but rather is a tool to track all components of a mangrove restoration project over time. And so, as many of you know, mangrove restoration is a key component towards achieving global targets and initiatives, such as those listed here, for reversing the degradation of ecosystems. However, our ability to track our progress towards these targets is often limited, and as Elena had shared, that the majority of restoration projects to date have largely been unsuccessful. And another related challenge to this is that often we receive information on restoration not in a systematic way. And some of those related challenges include lack of reporting. Many restoration projects don't report results, and if, as likely the case, those that don't are the ones that fail, then the restoration community loses the opportunity to learn from those mistakes. Also, information is scattered across different websites, gray literature, reports, papers, making the ability to consult evidence very time-consuming for decision-making. And then even where outcomes are reported, it's often in formats that are extremely variable, and then key aspects such as restoration costs, measures of success are severely lacking. And so one approach is to record individual restoration projects. And this is related to why the MRTT was created, to address those previous challenges I just mentioned, and to create a globally standardized reporting framework that can record mangrove restoration projects. So the aim is to achieve a balance, something that's not too onerous to complete, but comprehensive enough, and also to create a culture whereby this type of data is the standard to record. We also wanted to achieve buy-in from a large number of experts, scientists, practitioners on the ground, who so that the tool could be as applicable to as many people as possible. As I said, there were over 100 collaborators involved in the convening of this framework, many from different backgrounds and geographies, involved in projects on the ground that touch down on several of the global mangrove regions. And so just to drive home the main objectives of the tool, the first is obviously to help conservationists plan, conduct, and track components critical to the success of restoration projects over time, as well as to share information on projects with decision makers and other key stakeholders to help inform management. And then finally, to gather consistent data on outcomes to facilitate cross-project learning, again, to ultimately improve mangrove restoration success. And so what are the benefits of using this particular tool for a potential user? Well, the MRTT was created again to help really stimulate restoration best practice. This translates to supporting practitioners in identifying key steps for consideration and for tracking indicators when doing mangrove activities. And the hope is that it will provide a step-by-step guide on factors to consider when doing restoration, as well as. Yes.
Or can I stop you real briefly? I'm sorry to interrupt you. We've had
Sure.
a couple of requests for you to speak a little more slowly. Could you try to do that for this group?
Sure.
We have groups from all over. It'd be helpful for them to more easily understand.
Apologies, of course.
No worries. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so as I was saying, one of the benefits of using this tool is that it can help to stimulate restoration best practice, and we hope that this would be embedded with the use of other resources such as the decision support tool or guidance documents as were previously presented. The tool is also meant to make it easier to record monitoring outcomes. By displaying data, it is hoped that it will highlight the benefit of long-term monitoring, as well as monitoring a wider range of social and ecological outcomes, and really to help encourage funders to see the importance of monitoring in restoration projects. The hope is also that it will help practitioners visualize data when comparing to projects from around the world, looking at projects with similar underlying conditions that have used similar approaches and examining their changes in outcomes. And then at the highest level, again, to allow rapid synthesis of global restoration effort and success, the tool again helps to collect standardized data to increase learning opportunities from successes and failures. And so ideally with enough data also to potentially contribute towards sharing information through platforms such as the Global Mangrove Watch, where this tool is hosted, again, to further foster data sharing across the global mangrove community. So I very briefly just want to quickly summarize the development process of the tool, which started with an initial set of questions that cover comprehensively mangrove restoration projects based on research from Gatt et al. And then there were modifications to this framework that ensued through a series of science workshops that took place early 2021 with a mix of NGO and academic scientists. And then there followed practitioner workshops, which aim to gather input from practitioners involved in projects on the ground. There were 3 virtual workshops that took place in Fiji, Mexico, and East Africa. And again, these were used to assess whether the tool met the needs of the practitioner community and provided space to get feedback to further tailor the tool towards implementers. What followed these workshops was a pilot field test in an active restoration site in Mexico. You can see pictures to the right, which involved community members, local government, and participants from NGOs. We gathered further feedback to be incorporated into a revised version of the framework. And then what followed was the development of the online application the next year. The tool is currently available, I believe, in 4 languages and was formally launched on World Mangrove Day last year in Cartagena. And so this is really the overall structure of the tool, again, underpinned by a set of questions to capture metadata on the full life cycle of a project. So from the registration or planning phase to the intervention or implementation phase, and then finally monitoring. So there are 3 main sections with 10 subsections that can be completed throughout the course of a project or concurrently for historical projects. And so in the interest of time, I'm just sharing a fast snapshot of what the tool actually looks like, but it follows that same structure and can be organized via project across sites that can roll up into landscapes, and it can also be searched via organization. So just to delve a little bit deeper into each of these sections, the first is the registration or the planning phase, which is capturing the background and context information of the project. And so I'll just share a few example questions here, but these are to be completed before any restoration activities commence, and captures information on details and location and extent of the site, the groups involved in the planning and overall management of the project, the aims of the restoration project, which are categorized by ecological, socioeconomic, or other, and can be ranked in order of importance or connected to different stakeholder groups. Causes of loss and degradation, which can indicate a potential action that might be impactful, and then any baseline condition surveys at the site or ecosystem dynamics. The second phase is the intervention or implementation phase that consists of site interventions or costs, and this is completed when biophysical interventions or community activities are undertaken. And so the first subsection here notes information on the groups that are actually implementing the activities and contains a catalog of potential restoration approaches, from restoring hydrology to planting propagules to reducing wave energy, trapping sediment, as well as activities related to communities such as diversifying livelihoods, reducing overexploitation of mangrove products, education, and others. And then we have the costs section, which I alluded to. Predominantly, we do not have significant information on costs of restoration, but we capture or try to capture that information here across broad categories such as site planning and management, site maintenance, overall cost of biophysical interventions, etc. And finally, the last section is the monitoring section, which is designed to capture data over single or multiple surveys at a site, so that changes in management status, changes in socioeconomic outcomes, and then also ecological indicators can be recorded both pre and multiple times post-intervention, as well as relative to a reference site. So again, we're looking at changes in management status and protected status, for example. Similarly, under the second subsection, changes in governance, changes in tenure arrangements, for example. The MRTT provides space to record socioeconomic outcomes framed around a typology of human well-being attributes that actually can link to the socioeconomic aims that are identified in the registration portion of the tool. And then finally, the ecological status section, again, is capturing changes in attributes, specifically mangrove extent, condition, detection of natural regeneration, as well as a wider series of outcomes, such as, for example, the presence of a bird species. So that was an extremely fast walkthrough of the tool, really a snapshot, but I did just want to close with some related outputs, which include a user guide that you can find on the Global Mangrove Alliance website. It walks you through step-by-step each question to help you answer and clarify context and provide some definitions. And it's available in more languages actually than the tool itself currently. And then in the works is the development of a training module through the Global Mangrove Watch platform. This is meant to be more interactive and tackle some of the more complex questions and topics, again, helping practitioners complete the tool in reference to their specific context. So I'll just stop there. There's more information with this QR code. I'll put the link to the tool in the chat. And again, feel free to reach out after the webinar with any specific questions. But apologies for going over time, but I will now pass it to Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. So let's see if I can share my screen real quick. Okay, can we all see this okay?
Yes, looks like that's great.
There we go. Thank you. So I'm Mark Beeston. I'm the Technical Director for Conservation International's Blue Carbon Programme. We are time limited today, so I'm going to zoom through some frequently asked questions about blue carbon and about blue carbon credibility in particular. For any in-depth information, I would urge interested listeners to download the best practice guidelines and read at your leisure. If I move the slide on quickly before you finish reading, don't worry, I just use a lot of text so that when we share slides afterwards, the information is there. So don't worry if you missed that during the presentation. And if you do have a mobile phone to hand, grab it now, as I do tend to use QR codes to share links to useful resources. If you miss those, they are all linked to within the best practice guidelines. So just starting with the basics and what is blue carbon? Blue carbon really just refers to the carbon which is sequestered or emitted from marine ecosystems. And blue carbon ecosystems are those for which there is a large body of research and evidence that shows that they generally will store more carbon than they emit. At the moment, this includes mangroves, tidal marshes, and seagrasses, and it's likely going to expand to include kelp, other macroalgae systems, and some mudflat systems as well. Why is this blue carbon relevant to anyone working in mangrove restoration? Quite simply, an increasing number of governments and funders are becoming interested in the climate impact of mangrove restoration. These systems are super efficient, sucking up and storing atmospheric CO2 and trapping sediment carbon and storing it in all that lovely mud. Because of this high carbon sequestration rate and all the other things that mangroves do as well, they're starting to become a priority ecosystem for government action. For example, mangroves and blue carbon are increasingly mentioned in nationally determined contributions, which are the commitments governments make to the Paris Agreement. How does this help you as a project manager? Well, as governments commit to mangrove restoration, over the next few years, we expect to see increases in funding opportunities for projects which are aligned with national climate goals and supported internationally by initiatives such as the Mangrove Breakthrough. Many philanthropists are also looking at the climate impact of projects they choose to fund. So it's super useful to have that metric to be able to communicate that to a potential donor. To get a feel for the climate mitigation impact of your restoration work, you can just do this using peer-reviewed data which is already out there. You can get a pretty good estimate. The IPCC Wetlands Supplement from 2014 contains global default values, but peer-reviewed data for more local studies is generally more useful and isn't difficult to find online. There are also dedicated online platforms. Global Mangrove Watch is a Global Mangrove Alliance tool product that links in with the MRTT and the other tools we're talking about today. And also links in with the best practice guidelines. Quite simply, you can click on a country, it will bring up carbon data, blue carbon data for that country, for mangroves, and also information on loss rates, changes in extent, and a lot of other mangrove data. The most difficult blue carbon data to get is usually soil organic carbon. The Smithsonian are addressing this with a Coastal Carbon Atlas, which is a repository for data points from thousands of individual soil core studies. So if you have sediment core data, this is a great place to upload it, and it's a great place to find locally relevant soil carbon information. I'm not going too fast. Yeah, everyone's getting these links. If you do need to measure carbon in situ, if you do need site level data, the Coastal Blue Carbon Manual is really all you need to get started. I've used this myself over the last 10 years. It is somewhat dated, it is 10 years old, but a newer version is in the works at the moment, including updates in remote sensing and other methods. And yeah, if you need to do it yourself, download this. I've taken this into the field and used it, and it does work. And it also contains all the different equations you need and the mathematics to turn your field measurements into the data that you would then be able to use to calculate how much carbon is present in your site and how much carbon should be present in your site post-restoration, and give you that information to share. When we're measuring blue carbon, we look at 4 carbon pools: the above ground biomass, below ground biomass, and in some cases litter, dead wood, and large woody debris. In this image, you would measure the dead wood, because there's a lot of it, and there's not a lot, unfortunately, of anything else left of this mangrove site. And this is a real site that somebody's trying to restore, and it's taken a lot of planning. It's not actually difficult to take these measurements. You can do it with a tape measure, a couple of friends, and a can-do attitude. You'll get muddy, you'll get exhausted, but it's doable. The only part which is really, really very challenging is soil cores, and that's not just because they're actually physically demanding and tricky to draw from the ground, but because they're expensive to process. Most other things you can do just by measuring with tapes and then using equations to convert your field measurements to data. So of course you do need a lab, which is where the Coastal Carbon Atlas comes in very handy to supplement your field measurements. Just a quick note on salinity. This is a personal bugbear of mine. I've reviewed a lot of different projects in my time, and nobody ever sends me salinity data. There are 2 good reasons to collect this. One is it informs your restoration design. It lets you know which mangroves survive in which areas. It's closely linked to survivability. And also, if we know salinity, we know if the site is going to be producing methane, which we're going to have to build into our blue carbon calculations if it is. So measure it, it's easy, it takes less than 5 minutes per data point, and the gear you need costs $25. Or sometimes less if you get online from China. So, you know, do this as well. I really hope I'm on time. I can't see a clock with this up. So somebody shout at me if I'm running over. I'm not going to explain voluntary carbon markets in detail and how they work. That would take a whole other webinar and hours. And really, you can't learn it online on webinars. You need to dive into physical resources. Just for a super fast overview, a carbon credit is a tradable certificate which represents 1 metric ton or 1,000 kilos CO2 equivalent, so the equivalent value of carbon or other greenhouse gases. We just use CO2 equivalent to level the playing field across all of those. A carbon credit only counts if it's the direct, measurable result of a planned human intervention. If something's happening anyway, if carbon is being stored anyway, it's happening, it's naturally happening, that's not down to you, you can't count that. That's not a creditable thing. That's nature in a protected area doing its thing. Credits are tracked in databases, and when they can be bought and sold, up until the point they're used, at which point they can no longer be traded. At that point, they're retired. So they're a single-use thing. There are several layers of carbon markets. The one that concerns us most frequently is the voluntary carbon market. For this, we can produce credits and often sell them to individuals, to corporations, to institutions, anyone who wants to offset their own emissions. There are also compliance markets, emissions trading schemes, and there are government trades between countries as well. We're less concerned with those. Quite often nature-based credits aren't applicable to compliance schemes anyway. It really depends where you are in the world. There is a little bit of confusion, quite often with the terminology involved. We don't help in that we tend to call crediting programs standards, and we also call standards standards. Quickly explaining the terminology, a crediting program is the organization which designs and administers the different standards and methodologies. For example, VERA is a greenhouse gas crediting program. Their standard is their Verified Carbon Standard, or VCS, and they also run the Climate Community Biodiversity Standard, CCB. So they have multiple standards. For mangroves, you would use their VM0033 methodology. We do like to use confusing numbers for no reason. It could just be called the mangrove methodology. I'm not quite sure why it's not. Zooming through, this is a big question. There is an assumption that carbon crediting projects are money-making machines, and this does attract sometimes people into the space who are looking for an opportunity to make money. And the answer might surprise you, but really most projects don't make a lot of money. That's not the point. If you're looking at this as a profit-making scheme, then you're in the wrong business. If you're looking for a way to improve people's lives and protect and restore nature over decadal timescales with good monitoring, then crediting may be a useful funding source to help you meet those social and ecological targets and to ensure your project is still there in 10, 20, 30 years' time. Generally, a project can break even and make enough money to be able to support community needs, but often not much beyond that unless the price of credits really goes up, which is what some people are obviously gambling on. Just quickly touching on these different players entering the space. Historically, especially in the forestry space, there have been nature-based projects which have been poorly implemented and may not have properly covered all the different varied parts of project management we have to think about. So they may not have properly worked with communities, may not have set goals that align with community needs, and may have been reliant on poor science that doesn't generate reliable credits. To protect against bad practice and to support good practice, to make sure that good work is recognised and attracts a higher price per credit. The high quality blue carbon principles and guidance defines what best practice is, and it's an essential read for anyone thinking of getting into the space. So please do download it. and there is a practitioner's guide aimed at project managers and restoration professionals, just to really link what we do on the ground to what buyers are looking for in the voluntary carbon market.
Mark, sorry to interrupt,
Yep.
but we only have 5 minutes left for the webinar.
Oh no, I'm so sorry, I've overrun really badly. I've got one slide left, so let's call it a day here on this one. Thank you, Val. Student standard, ICROA exists to show which are good and which are less good. So there is some guidance. And before you get started on a project, check you can actually legally sell credits in your place of operation. Make sure there is a legal framework to work within. And see if you can model the project impact first before you start conversations with people who are reliant on these systems, with communities, with other stakeholders, because you don't want to be caught out in a situation where you've started a conversation and months later you realise that your project is not viable and you've just wasted everyone's time and messed with people. All the stages of production are outlined in detail in the guidelines. And I'm going to stop because I'm so conscious I've overrun. Thank you very much for the heads up. Thank you for listening. I'll share the slides afterwards and let's zoom into questions before we completely run out of time. You can download the full guidelines here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you all. If you want to stop sharing your screen, then we'll have the others turn on their cameras as well here. As you've all seen, we don't have tremendous amount of time for questions, but we'll try to get to a few, I would say, here as best we can. Then we're going to let you all go with the hour and not go over. Sharing things into the chat right now is kind of a challenge because a lot of people are putting information into the chat, so it's a little hard to keep up with. But I did just put into the chat several links in there for best practice guidelines, the guiding principles, Building with Nature project, and the Global Mangrove Alliance once again. So feel free to scroll back up and check that out. For the group, I guess, talk to us a little bit about those 6 guiding principles. Can they be considered a one-size-fits-all approach, or what are the usual problems that are encountered with dealing with the communities and those guiding principles? Anyone want to take that?
I can take that, and would love to hear as well from Valerie and Mark on that. Could you just repeat the question again, Tony?
Sorry, I thought I unmuted, but I did not. The 6 guiding principles, can those be considered a one-size-fits-all approach? So something that should work all around the globe, no matter what, in all mangrove restoration projects? And what are some of the usual problems that were encountered when thinking about those principles?
These principles do respond to the needs globally. Of course, every site has its own issues and should be considered as, you know, every site will have its own problems to deal with. The idea is to provide really these guardrails to help you really stay on track and really take into consideration each of these guiding principles from start to finish. I don't know of any examples where there could have been issues. I don't know if Mark or Valerie want to add to that with community members.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't think we have much time to really delve into that really deeply, but yes, there's certainly going to be issues faced with a lot of those guiding principles, but the idea is that those principles are there to help you identify and respond to those issues.
Yeah, they're really a framework to help you prioritize, making sure that you're keeping community needs in mind as you work through your project and design it. Yeah. I've just seen time flip up to the hour as I spoke.
Yeah, no worries. Maybe one last short short question on my end here. So if we provide a kind of a one-stop shop, one place that everyone can go to find what they need, where do we recommend that they start for that with all the things that have been shared today? Where should we direct everyone to?
Well, I can jump in there with at least one resource. One would be the Global Mangrove Alliance Knowledge Hub, which you can find just by Googling the Global Mangrove Alliance. It's a great start to find all of the materials that have, I think, been discussed today, as well as a range of briefs and case studies, etc. Would be a great place to start. But if others have other resources, please jump in.
Yeah, I mean, there's an executive summary to the guidelines, so you could start with that. And there's also a resources table in the guidelines as well. So yeah, you can have a read through that. But I mean, the guidelines are not that long, so you could probably read them in entirety
Excellent. Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you again to our presenters for this excellent presentation, and I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to more questions today. Lots of information to present in an hour, and so we thank you all for taking the time to give us all of that. Thank you also to all of you that were able to attend today's webinar. I encourage you to visit the SER website to see a list of our upcoming webinars, as well as learn more about our work and the benefits of membership with our organization. And additionally, and as a reminder, a recording of today's webinar will be made available in SER's webinar library. It will be open access, open to the public, and I hope to have that posted there no later than tomorrow. So you should be able to see that there pretty quickly. That will do it for today. We thank you all for your attending, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.